Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast. Learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 62, and I'll be talking to Bob Depasquale, an advocate of stewardship. He has always believed in taking care of things that he's been blessed with. It's in his mission to help others do the same. Bob's perspective derived from a battle with cancer at the age of 18. After growing up an only child, it wasn't until he was legally an adult that he felt alone. Having his life threatened at such a young age led to a unique view of the gift that is vitality. Bob now serves as a founder of Initiate Impact Virtual Family Offices, a wealth management firm dedicated to radical generosity. He also hosts the Speaking of Impact and Modern Legacies podcast. Hello and welcome to Bob. How are you, Bob?
I'm good, Niranjan. How are you today? It's good to see you.
I'm doing well, thank you. And good to see you. Thank you for taking time out because I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your journey and everything you've been on. And we know every single person on this planet has a story, and we all have a path, and we've all had some tumultuous times that'll carry us through the good, the bad, and the ugly. Mm-hmm. But yours seemed particularly interesting to me, not only from some health challenges that you had to overcome, but also your perspective on life now, on what is it you're doing now in your world and in life.
First of all, I completely agree with you. We all have different challenges. And one thing we can't do is compare and measure our challenges up to other people, right? There's different ways of dealing with things. And, I think our experiences are all unique and they should be taken that way. So, my life experience is I spent about half my life as a healthy kid who thought he was invincible and just, I had a loving parents and great upbringing. And then I had an incredibly unique experience with illness and terrorism that I can explain briefly in just a moment. But the back half of my life so far has really drawn from the perspective of that experience of mine. And so it's kind of a unique journey because more recently I've been talking about and claiming how it's been about half of my life has been before my most transformative experience. I've had others, but the main one. And then half of it has been after. So I'm at this unique crossroads in life right now where I can say, wow, I've spent just as much time in what I believe to be the proper mindset as I did prior to that. And, when you're growing up and you're adolescent, I'm not saying I was in the wrong mindset. I just hadn't really matured yet. And then all of a sudden at 18, I matured kind of fast. So I can explain all about that story. But to answer your question, I have had a transformative experience in my life that really has led me to the mindset of generosity and positive impact in the world.
What do you believe about yourself now? And how does that define who you are today?
I believe myself now as some kind of conduit for positive impact in the world. I know a lot more about that now. I think part of life's journey is understanding that. I don't know if I'll ever have the perfect answer for that, but I know much more about that now that I've spent the past 21 years really focusing. Well, maybe not 21, the past 19 years or so, really focusing on trying to hone that in. And I believe about myself now that I have specific gifts and skills that have been given to me to use for positive impact in the world, to help people have a better life. And I always, I heard this artist once tell a group of people that he was addressing, this always stuck with me. He said, you may not change the world, but you can change the world for one. And it was so powerful to me at the time because it hit me that the major struggles that I've had in my life included some people that without them, A, I wouldn't have my life, and B, even if I did, it would be much different. And I think that's important for me to consider now. I may not be called or designed or prepared to solve world hunger or to end poverty forever or to become the most popular philanthropist known to man. I don't think that's what generosity and giving and making a positive impact is about. I may not be that person, but I may be that person for one other person. And if that's the case, then so be it. I'm going to do my best to make sure that that person has a great experience. So, you ask about how it defines me and what's most meaningful. And to me, I say I'm here specifically to use what I do good at, which is a very limited skill set. I'm definitely not a jack of all trades, but I need to use those limited skills in the most positive fashion I possibly can.
And what are those skills and attributes that you bring to the table? Even as limited that you say they may be, they can often be more potent and more crystal clear in how they are projected and shared with others, and how sharp your tool is, if you will.
I love that word potent. That's a great descriptive word for our skills. And yeah, I think we all have our most potent skills, and mine are, I believe them to be communication. I've in various forms of communication, I feel like I've practiced and spent enough time. If you've ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, he makes this rule that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert at something. So I've spent more than 10,000 hours communicating. I work in the financial space. My business is a family office style wealth management firm. So we have lots of gifts and skills when it comes to projections, mathematics, and some of the more technical things when it comes to taxes, estate planning, and investment management. So those things might be super boring topics to discuss on a podcast, but I know that we do those really well. And our firm focuses on helping people be as generous as they possibly can. So we handle some of those technical things that we excel at. And hopefully my role in the firm is to communicate the message well. So I try to use my communicative skills well enough to not only share our message about our business, because we are running a business, but also to educate people. So we can take the knowledge that my business partner has and some of the experience that I have, and hopefully I can use my skill of communication to help people learn about some of those topics and how important it is to be generous in life. And so I use those communication skills and some of those more technical financial skills, hopefully to really, really help people. And, we've gotten great feedback over the years. And I worked for an organization for 12 years and I loved working for them. And about a year and 2 or 3 months ago, my business partner and I decided to leave and open our own firm. And really so that I could focus more on those things that I feel that we're best at. Because previously, when you're working for another organization, you have other responsibilities. And I loved working for them. Tremendous organization, loved their mission. But it was just time for us to kind of spread our own wings. And I believe, I could tell you that I think one of my skills is to help people use their skills, but I think that's kind of like a little bit of a cop-out answer. I think we all can help people use their skills. It's just how you actually execute that and are you actually taking real steps to do and help people. And I feel, and it's a great place to be, the joy and fulfillment that I get in the work that I do is amazing, because I really do feel like I'm using what I'm good at to help other people and to make the world a better place.
So with all of that, and especially the communication style that you speak to, because you do many podcasts and you have your own too, and you've written a book. So all these arms of communication seem to be that sharpening of your own tool.
That's a great way to put it too, sharpening. You talked about the different methods of communication. And so, yes, I'm an active podcaster, hosting and guesting. We're working on YouTube channel, and I'm trained in video broadcasting too. So, some people say they're afraid to speak or be in front of the camera. I actually love it. Maybe I'm strange, but that's cool. So between the videos, our social media content, we're working on rolling out some other forms. But another big one that we use a lot is social audio. So if you're familiar with Twitter Spaces, I host multiple Twitter Spaces every week. So you can check those out. But it's really, like you said, it's honing and practicing those skills over and over again. And even though I was trained in it formally in school, you can lose it if you don't practice it. So the past year has really been amazing because I've gotten back into it. I mean, I probably spend, Naranjan, probably 10 hours, at least 10 hours a week, some kind of broadcasting or presenting, whether it's a podcast or a Twitter space or a YouTube video, or a social media post or reel. I probably spend about 10 hours, with my voice, and even more right now, because you mentioned my book. I'm actually currently recording the audio version of my book. And that's really, honestly, that's a whole different muscle. Literally, like there's actually studies on this, like there's different muscles in your neck and in your voice box that you use when you're reading. And so I'm kind of practicing that skill now too. I feel like I'm picking it up pretty quick though. So yeah, I spent a lot of time doing this stuff, and I never really put that all together. You really make a good point.
Yeah, thank you. It is. Well, sometimes when we're in it, we don't recognize it, right? We don't see it.
Good point. That's a really, really good point. I've been in it pretty hardcore for the past year or so. So right? I need to maybe open my eyes.
And isn't that the case for how people do live their lives from the perspective of being in it? Prime example, the last 2-3 years, the global shifts that have happened. However you want to call the name of what happened over the last 2 years, teetering on 3 for some countries, but has that put people in that narrow thinking space, that very linear programming to a certain degree, that they're only exercising that muscle, to your point, and getting out of that's difficult.
Yes, I agree. When you don't practice other skills, interpersonal skills, communication, when you haven't traveled or been able to experience, interpersonal skills and interaction, I think you lose it. Maybe not completely. I think, 2 years is a long time, but it's not a lifetime, right? And so, it really, this past couple of years has been pretty unique. And personally, outside of illness and those things that have affected my family and life, but from a digital communication and business perspective, I've had exponential growth in the past 2 years. I've learned so much about these sort of things and these sorts of communication and the way to network and build relationships with people. I mean, I'm typically an in-person person. I used to love doing in-person presentations, networking, shaking hands, kissing babies, all of that stuff. But it's just been totally different. I now work pretty much from my house, and I interact with people on the computer all day long. And it's been really cool, really cool.
Just another layer of how adaptable we are as human beings. Even you sharing yourself from the perspective of the transformation that you had in your own experiences as a young man, not to say you're an old man, but in your younger years.
I'm old.
But what does that look like in transforming ourselves as human beings, be it a skill set, a knowing, insight, or these people that are around us, and how that shifts how we move forward based on what we've experienced in the past?
Well, for me, I heard someone say the other day about the importance of being present. And I think it's an interesting concept because, the past we tend to have regret about the past, and we tend to be anxious about the future. But in the present, ironically, we kind of lose track of time if you're really in the present. Like, I don't know what time it is right now. We're recording this podcast because I'm 100% into our conversation and appreciating your questions. But if I was worried about the next podcast, or if I was trying to remember what I said on the last show, I probably wouldn't be present. And so, your life experiences, I think, really can teach you a lesson about that presence, right? Because you can be more aware and understand things. And my experience when I was 18 years old, I didn't realize it at the time, but because of it, I've become more aware. And that really helped me concentrate and try to be more present in the actions and the work and the podcast and anything that I'm doing throughout the day. I'm not perfect. In fact, I'm probably closer to fully flawed than fully perfect. But I have been able in the more recent years of my life to be able to do this better. And you just, when you lay down at night, you put your head on the pillow, you just feel a little bit more relieved and less stressed, to be honest with you. There's just something about it. And I don't think it's one specific item or one time throughout the day. I think there's a cumulative effect. I talk about the concept of decision fatigue in my book. And I think the concept also applies just to general stress and general thought structure. And so if throughout the day, you're anxious and worried about things and you're not present in the work that you're doing, your work is probably not as good. If I was distracted, I probably wouldn't be a very effective guest on your show. So I do have to be present. But even beyond that, if the mind is stressed and anxious about things all day long, it's very, very hard to lay down at night and just get a good night's sleep, which I don't know about you, but a very good night's sleep is probably one of the most, outside of, diet and exercise, might be the most important part of my health and my life, is making sure that I get my 8 hours every night. So when you ask about events in life and how you look back on use them, I think you really need to consider the situation you're in, who was there, how you overcame it, and who helped you do it. And then you can be more aware. Once you understand that about your most transformative experience in life, then you can probably apply some of those principles to other things. Some of the smaller, maybe seemingly not as significant, even though I might argue sometimes those smaller things are even more significant than maybe the biggest things that are easy to recognize.
What do you feel are some of those areas for you?
I'm a visionary, and I have this tendency to come up with new ideas, whether good or bad, probably more of bad than good. But I love to think about new opportunities, change, chances to do great things, chances to meet new people, travel new places, try new prospects. And that's a great skill to have when you're building something, especially in the initial stages, but it really doesn't help you integrate. And there's a book called Rocket Fuel by a guy by the name of Gino Wickman. He talks about integrators and visionaries, and every good visionary's got to have an integrator. Otherwise they'll have great ideas and never implement them. And every good integrator has to have a partner with a good visionary, because they'll just grind and work all day, but they'll never make progress. They'll never be innovative. And so when you talk about, for me, one of the things that I need to do is I have to be a little bit more present in the moment with what's most important. And a friend of mine, I talked about our Twitter spaces. A friend of mine, his name is Liam. He lives in England. I've never actually met him in person, but we host Twitter spaces together. And he talks about asking yourself a simple question: what's the most important thing that I can do right now? And it seems so easy, but it's really, really profound, because there's so many distractions in the world these days. If I could flip around the back and show you the back of this cover of this book, there's a statistic about how over 21 times a day we swipe or click or text or something on a mobile device. So there's thousands of reasons for us to get distracted by things that either happened in the past or things that may happen in the future, and we don't concentrate on the present. So me as this visionary, I have to stop, shut off, take away, put the devices away, shut off Wi-Fi, whatever it is. I got to get away from all of those stimulations so that I can ask myself, what's the most important thing that I do right now? So your question was, what are those things for me? I can't give you a long list, but I tell you what, as short as the list might be, it definitely starts with that. Asking myself, what can I do right now in the moment, no matter what I'm working on, whether it's something in my personal life or my business. And if you can do that, if you can identify that one thing you can do right now, I guarantee you'll make progress, and you'll feel good about yourself too, because that one thing is really, really important. And if you can get that done, you'll be much more likely to continue pushing on. If you don't, if you get distracted, which I'm first one that happens to me all the time, if you get distracted, you won't actually make progress on the most important thing. You might make progress on something else that you got distracted by, but you didn't make progress on what was most important. And I always encourage people to identify what's most important and work on that first.
Have you recognized for yourself the bigger pieces that are most important for you are typically the same things day to day?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, I would argue that I don't think I've met a person or worked with a person that I ever believe that for at least a period of time or a season of life, that their most important things are the same. And if they're not, I would argue you haven't actually identified which things are most important. Because I mentioned about, limited skill set and the things that you're best at. I think it same type of concept applies to people right there. You can't have 10 priorities. Then what you really have is no priorities. So, I have specific things that I prioritize in my personal and family life. I have specific things that I prioritize in my business life, and I have specific things that I prioritize in my faith life. And I think if regardless of which one of those apply to you, whether you work in business or not, or whether you have a family or not, or whether you have a faith that's important to you or not, whichever one of those three, whether it's all three or just one, you got to figure out what's most important. You got to figure out the things that you need to do to improve and find growth. And I think that's what it's all about. So if you have, for me, it's three. It might be three or less, I think is really kind of a limit. And I found that to be the case for myself. In some cases, it's two. And so I heard this example once about looking at your priorities and the things that you want to get done, like trying to put items in a glass. So picture a big glass, and then you have a couple rocks, a handful of pebbles, and a whole bunch of sand. If you try to put the sand, or you inadvertently put all the sand in the glass first, you might be able to get the pebbles in there, but you'll never be able to fit the big rocks. And those big rocks are those big priorities. So you got to find your top 1, 2, 3 priorities, put them in the jar first, then put the pebbles, those secondary things that are important but may not be top priority. Then the sand, you can fill in all the extra space with as much sand as you can possibly want, whatever the sand is. But you got to put the rocks in first. So really, to be honest with you, I think you got to have priorities. And now there's seasons of life, things change. Now that my business partner and I have our own company, our priorities have changed. So, but from day to day, as long as there's not a major shift in the season of life, like maybe it's a family change, maybe you got married, had children, God forbid someone passed away, you got a new job, you moved, maybe you found a new opportunity, you won the lottery, or you got ill, who knows? There could be anything. Those were all pretty solid reasons to have a change, but you shouldn't be having major changes every other day. That's just not stable and it's not sustainable.
Absolutely. But often grasping and capturing that stability of strength, those big rocks, as you call it, can be a little bit difficult to figure those out, because we live so much in a space of got to think about this process, got to analyze it, got to do theories on it, got to do all these analyses around them.
Mm-hmm.
Does that take away from the connection to what these rocks are, and as going into that space of why am I here?
I think that question will never have the perfect answer. Why am I here? Because like you mentioned, I mean, as humans, I think there are changes and there is nuance in life. So I found that even the people who have the deepest understanding of why they are here, and I feel like I'm getting towards that place in my life, there's always going to be new opportunities and things. So the first thing I think you got to consider is you can't you got to keep your expectations reasonable, because if you overestimate your ability to focus, I think you're bound to fail. You're setting yourself up. So it's really, really important that you understand that it's not going to be this perfect journey. But I know you talk about living an expansive and meaningful and confident life. And I think the way you do that is to believe and understand that you aren't perfect and that you can't, that mistakes are going to happen. But it's the ability to It's your reaction to those things and your ability to maintain your emotional state when changes happen that enable you to live this more fulfilled, joyful life, because you know that you've got the priorities in order. So even if the other things happen, it's not the end of the world. An example I can give in my space, in my life, is that people tell me all the time, I'm struggling with my budget. I need to, Bob, I'm spending too much money, or I'm not making enough money and I can't pay my bills. And I feel overwhelmed by my finances. And I asked them, what did you spend money on this week? Where did you spend your time? Indicate to me what's draining these resources. And 9 times out of 10, they can't answer that question. And 10 out of 10 times after that point, the solution is simply to identify those things that are most important and actually spend money on them, which sounds counterintuitive because we're trying to get people to save money in their budget and they can't pay their bills. But in reality, the problem is that they haven't prioritized those things that actually give them joy. So everything else in their life is distracting them. And it's really, really easy to convince them to buy something or spend time somewhere because they're yearning for this fulfillment and this joy. And, most people, in my humble opinion, probably shouldn't spend $5 to $10 on Starbucks every day. It's probably a little bit better for your budget to maybe buy coffee and make it at home, or figure out a less expensive way to do that. But there's certain people out there who that 15 minutes of sitting in Starbucks and checking email and sipping their latte or whatever it is like the greatest 15 minutes of the week or the day. And you know what? For that person, hey, it's probably worth $5 a day. And that $5 they spent will prevent them from spending, $5, $10, $15, $20 on other things that they're in, whether consciously or subconsciously yearning for something great or something better. So in the same area in the same concept with what we're talking about here with just general fulfillment, expansive, meaningful, confident lives, you got to find those things that are worth it to spend that time on, because when you do, you'll be satisfied. And the other distractions in life and problems and troubles that you've already admitted that you're not perfect and will not be able to completely solve, which is the first point that I made, will not bother you as much because the most important things will be handled first. So to bring it back full circle, once again, those priorities are so important because not only do they allow you to find the joy, they allow you, it's kind of a guard or a defense of all the things that claim to bring you joy that the world tells us are important, but don't actually. They're a false sense of joy.
The world has a lot to answer for in terms of how one moves through it, through a reflective space, even from a communication level. Be it, I don't want to say positive or negative, but be it the yin or the yang. But how we look at the yin and the yang is going to be different to your own perspective of life. And bringing that also from the perspective of, as you said, what are those priorities? What are those rocks? And by no means am I saying when I pose the question, why are we here? There is no cookie cutter answer. There is no, to me, there is no perfection. So perhaps the bigger narrative to each of us, from you being on your journey and all that you have been through, is to settle into that space of, it's okay. There is no perfection. And to settle with that from a different standpoint of being content in who you are, barring everything that's gone on the outside in the world.
It's really interesting how we have to look inward to understand that which is outward, right? It starts with you. It starts with your own feelings and understandings and thoughts. And I've learned a lot over the past year or so about introspection. And I'm definitely not a psychologist and I'm not trained in this art, but I feel that my own experiences have allowed me to understand that a little bit more. If you can't find the answer to that question, that we've effectively determined that there is no perfect answer, but if you can't really find that answer, I think maybe you're searching too hard. I think sometimes the things are right in front of us. Those experience of presence that we kind of touched on are right there, because there's no shortage of opportunities for stimulation these days, right? You can't. No one. I don't think anyone would be able to convince me, unless you live completely off the grid. You can't really convince me that there's not enough opportunity for messaging, right? To experience communication. It's a lot of times I think there's plenty of answers. Maybe we're actually searching too hard. I don't know. What do you think?
It's an interesting point. Communication is at his fingertips, literally. But then is it that we are drowning in it?
Yeah, maybe there's just too much. I believe in most things in moderation, right? I mean, with few exceptions to the rule. And I heard someone say once, actually, ironically, they said, I believe in everything in moderation, including moderation. Meaning there's a select few things that you really need to go all in on and spend a lot of time, maybe overwork yourself thinking about working on in life at certain times in life that's appropriate, I think. But in most cases, I think we're probably asking for too much. We read too many self-help books. One of the gentlemen I had on my podcast, he made this comment. He said, I like to call it shelf help, because we have all these great ideas, but they all get put on the shelf. We have all these self-help books, but they just sit on the shelf because there's not enough time in the day to actually experience them. So I think it really, really applies. In my experience when I was 18 years old, taught me that time on earth is limited, but B, you really have to consider the things that are most meaningful and start with them. There can be more. When I say prioritize and find those things, that doesn't mean for the rest of your life it'll be 3 priorities and you'll never think about anything else and be really boring. It's, what are the 3 things right now? And if you complete that one task tomorrow, that's great. Something else will replace it. And it's amazingly freeing and not limiting when you limit yourself to three priorities. It's just really powerful. Like, I used to think I need to have a million things going on, and that's it. I'm like a caged lion because I just want to do 15 things at once. But when in reality, you're actually releasing yourself of the burden of worry and anxiety and regrets and all these things because you're worried about too many things at once. So it's important, really important.
And we've all heard the analogy, less is more, right?
Yeah, it's cliche, but it's very meaningful. In fact, I was talking about Twitter earlier. I got in a conversation about this with someone too on that platform, that, there's so much information out there about how you need to do more. You got to do this, you got to do that. You're not good enough. You're not worthy. You're not capable. You need my help. You need to take my course, read my book, watch my YouTube video. And I mean, in my humble opinion, most of those people are lying. I don't mean to be rude, but it's just not true. Most of us don't really need that much more. We need less and maybe a little bit more focus.
Right. And maybe a shift in where that focus is. Is it all in the headspace, or is it actually in the heart? Because if it's all in the headspace, we're constantly looking outwards. Can we drop that awareness into the heart and go inwards? Which will lean on some very different results.
Yes, very, very much so. And I think people would be surprised. I'm a pretty good example. I was never the type of person to look inward and to consult the heart, if you will, as you're saying. And I thought probably earlier in my life that I would never be able to do that. Like, it just wasn't me. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. I just said, that's just not me. I'm more of a driven, thinker, right or left brain, whichever one is the one that's more, related to rationality, right? But I realized there was a pretty quick shift. As far over in one side of the spectrum as I thought I was, it was only my perception. I believe it or not, I did have this ability to be more introspective, to consult my heart more. And now I find myself having much more balance. And I didn't ever expect it, but it's the case now.
Yeah. And it's important for us to check that balance. I referenced the yin and the yang earlier, and you referenced balance in terms of how many rocks can you get in the glass, which is going to equate to potentially more or less sand. But the essentials are in there. And the scale is the same thing. The yin and the yang is the same. We've got to create a balance of what it is we have in our lives and how we navigate through it and how we sit with it.
Mm-hmm. I think balance that's a powerful word. I had a discussion with a group of people about work-life balance once, and someone told me they prefer the term work-life harmony. And I don't know if it applies here directly, but I always thought that was interesting because, once again, acknowledging that it's never perfect, right? Like balance suggests that it's 50 pounds on this side, 50 pounds on another. When in reality, I think it's more, we should strive for harmony more than perfect balance. Because there's just times in my life, in my professional life, where I really have to use my intuition and be super rational and say, I got to get 8% on this. And I justify that by percentages. But then there's times in my personal life where maybe I'm talking with my wife or one of my other loved ones, and I have to say, okay, how does emotion and nuance involved in this situation? And when it comes to your own self awareness and self-understanding, I think that's important too. I think you got to be able to have harmony. I would say in my life, I probably consult the heart more than the head, but that doesn't mean I never use my head, right? I mean, I think we have to use our brains, and we have to have good perception of what's going on around us at times. But I really appreciate the concept of what you're talking about, because I think most people are probably skewed too far in one direction because that's just what the brain is used, that's what their body is used to doing, right? I mean, humans are habitual. So you just go to the normal, what protocol is. You're used to thinking that way, so that's what you do.
So where are you going to go from here? What's next with all that you've built, all that you have developed, and the intentions that you have as the world is coming out of this introspective, linear thinking way? What's the next little while look like for you, Bob?
Well, I want to mention this briefly because we have kind of alluded to it. So when I was 18 years old, I was diagnosed with cancer. And in a very, very short period of time, it's a much longer story. I'd be happy to share it or point people to other places that I've shared it. But in a short period of time, I thought I was this invincible college athlete, and I was diagnosed with cancer. My uncle's best friend completed the most generous act I had ever seen in life by basically giving my family his car while we were up in a strange place in New York so that I could go around and meet a bunch of doctors. And then a couple of days after that, the same gentleman was in the Twin Towers during 9/11 and lost his life. And so my emotional, mental, and physical experience during that really, really short period of time was truly taxing. And I bring that up because there's no way you can do that alone. There's no way that you can get through that period of time just by yourself. Although I thought I did. I thought I was going to beat cancer and I was going to get over this whole, I thought I did everything that my oncologist told me to do to a T. Every piece of advice he gave, the glasses of water to the ounce, minutes of sleep, right? I mean, down to the minute, waking up at the same time, eating the right food, not eating other food, doing everything I possibly could. I recovered physically and mentally, but it took me years to recover emotionally. So when you ask about what's next, I have this incredible and sense of urgency since that period of time to use the days, hours, hopefully years that I still have left on earth, because I wasn't sure that I was going to have them for a short period of time there, that I use them in a positive manner. And so what's next is continuing to build, hopefully, a responsible business that does well and also does good. I'll never lose my driven desire to compete and do well at things. I think that's been a blessing and a good thing in my life. So I'll always have that desire to do really well at whatever it is I'm chasing. The difference is now, though, there's a different purpose behind it. And so what's next is continuing to use tools like a book or a podcast or our business, Initiate Impact, to make the world a better place. So thank you so much for having me in the show.
Thank you, Bob, for your time, energy, and experiences. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.